The revolutionary discovery, unveiling the hidden truths of self and no-self throughout history, the human quest for self-understanding has led to some of the most profound discoveries in philosophy, psychology, and spirituality. Across different cultures and time periods, thinkers, mystics, and scholars have pondered a fundamental question. Who am I? This inquiry has birthed two seemingly opposing perspectives. One that emphasizes the discovery of a deeper, true self, as seen in Carl Jung's psychology, and another that suggests the self is an illusion, a core principle in Buddhist philosophy. What if these two perspectives are not contradictions, but complementary pieces of the same puzzle? The realization that these ideas, though originating from vastly different traditions, might actually be pointing toward the same ultimate truth is nothing short of revolutionary. It bridges Western psychology with Eastern wisdom, offering a holistic framework for understanding human consciousness. In this exploration, we embark on a journey across time and disciplines, uncovering how Jung's quest for individuation aligns with the Buddhist path to no-self. By understanding their hidden connection, we may unlock a deeper sense of personal freedom, one that is both grounded in psychological integration and liberated from the illusion of ego. A breakthrough in understanding the self. For centuries, the notion of self has been at the heart of human experience. In the Western tradition, psychology and philosophy have largely viewed the self as something to be discovered, developed, and understood. This perspective suggests that beneath our conditioning, fears, and unconscious tendencies lies an authentic, integrated self waiting to be realized. Meanwhile, the Eastern tradition, especially in Buddhist thought, challenges this assumption. It proposes that the self is a construct, a collection of transient experiences and mental formations with no permanent essence. To cling to a fixed sense of self, Buddhism teaches, is to suffer. At first glance, these perspectives seem irreconcilable. One seeks the true self, the other dissolves it. But what if both are addressing different aspects of the same existential truth? What if true psychological and spiritual freedom comes not from choosing one path over the other, but from integrating both? This revolutionary realization has the potential to transform how we perceive our existence. It suggests that self-discovery and self-transcendence are not opposites, but two sides of the same coin. Challenging conventional assumptions. Traditionally, Western psychology has placed great emphasis on identity, personal development, and the formation of a coherent self-concept. Jung, for instance, argued that individuals must go through a process of individuation, a journey of integrating the various parts of the psyche, including the conscious and unconscious, to become a whole and authentic person. This perspective values self-awareness and self-actualization as pathways to personal fulfillment. However, this assumption is challenged by Eastern traditions, particularly Buddhism, which asserts that attachment to a fixed identity is a major cause of suffering. From a Buddhist standpoint, clinging to an idea of self reinforces the illusion of separateness, which leads to dissatisfaction, anxiety, and suffering. Instead of finding oneself, the path to liberation lies in seeing through the illusion of self and embracing the impermanence of all things. This stark contrast raises profound questions. Is the self something to be uncovered, or something to be relinquished? Does psychological integration contradict the concept of no-self, or does it complement it? Can we find a way to reconcile these perspectives in a way that leads to genuine freedom? A new synthesis, beyond the self and no-self dichotomy, rather than viewing these two perspectives as contradictory. A deeper examination reveals that they may actually support one another. Jung's individuation process requires deep self-reflection, integration of the shadow, the unconscious aspects of the psyche, and a commitment to authenticity. In doing so, one moves beyond societal conditioning and unconscious patterns to develop a self that is whole and free from false identities. Interestingly, this mirrors the Buddhist process of self-inquiry, in which a practitioner investigates the nature of the self, discarding all that is impermanent and conditioned. The ultimate realization in Buddhism is that what we consider the self is merely a collection of thoughts, emotions, and sensory experiences, none of which constitute a permanent essence. Thus, individuation and self-transcendence are not opposites, they are part of a continuum. One must first integrate the unconscious and become whole before they can see through the illusion of self altogether. The journey of self-discovery eventually leads to the dissolution of the self, revealing a greater truth beyond individuality. The implications of this discovery, this revolutionary synthesis, has profound implications for psychology, spirituality, and personal development. Healing through integration and letting go many psychological struggles stem from fragmentation, the disconnect between different aspects of the self. Jungian psychology helps us integrate these fragmented parts. However, true healing also requires letting go of attachment to any fixed identity, which Buddhist practice facilitates. A person may work through childhood wounds, unconscious fears, and conditioned patterns through Jungian techniques, but ultimate liberation comes when they stop identifying with those patterns entirely. Freedom beyond the ego. Modern society places great emphasis on personal identity, achievements, and individuality. However, clinging too strongly to a rigid self-concept leads to suffering. By embracing both Jungian integration and Buddhist detachment, we cultivate a healthy self-awareness while also recognizing that the self is fluid and ever-changing. A holistic approach to self-realization. Instead of choosing between self-discovery and self-dissolution, we can embrace both. Psychological growth and spiritual awakening are not at odds, they complement each other. The process of becoming whole and the realization that there is no permanent self are two phases of the same evolutionary journey. Chapter 1: A Bridge Across Time, Connecting Jungian Psychology and Buddhist Wisdom. Throughout history, humanity has grappled with profound questions about identity, consciousness, and the nature of the self. Across different cultures and epochs, thinkers, philosophers, and spiritual teachers have attempted to decipher the mysteries of human existence. While their methods and terminologies have varied, many have arrived at strikingly similar conclusions about the nature of the mind and the path to personal liberation. In this chapter, we explore a remarkable bridge that spans across time and ideology, connecting the insights of Carl Jung, a pioneer in Western psychology, with the ancient wisdom of Buddhism. While one perspective seeks the development of the self and the other advocates the realization of no self, a deeper examination reveals that these ideas are not contradictory. Rather, they form two parts of a greater whole, a roadmap for personal transformation and ultimate freedom. The ancient and the modern, two paths, one destination at first glance. Carl Jung's psychological theories and Buddhist philosophy may seem worlds apart. Jung, a 20th century Swiss psychiatrist, focused on individuation, the process of integrating different aspects of the psyche to become a whole, authentic self. He saw personal development as a journey towards self-realization, where individuals must confront their unconscious fears, integrate their hidden aspects, the shadow, and ultimately cultivate a unique, individuated identity. On the other hand, Buddhist philosophy, which dates back over 2,500 years, teaches the doctrine of Anatta, non-self. This perspective suggests that the self is not a fixed entity, but a fluid, ever-changing construct. Instead of searching for a true self, Buddhist practice encourages individuals to see through the illusion of selfhood altogether, leading to liberation from suffering. These two perspectives might seem to be in direct conflict. One emphasizes the integration of the self, while the other aims to dissolve it. However, when examined closely, they reveal a deep and complementary relationship, forming a bridge across time that unites psychology and spirituality. Jung's quest for wholeness, individuation, and the self. Carl Jung was deeply interested in the human psyche, seeking to understand the forces that shape our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. He introduced the concept of individuation, the lifelong process of integrating different parts of the psyche, including the personal and collective unconscious. According to Jung, the mind consists of multiple layers: the persona, the outward mask we wear to navigate society; The ego, our conscious sense of self. The shadow, the hidden, repressed parts of our personality. The anima/animus, the feminine and masculine energies within each person. The self, the integrated, whole being that emerges when all aspects of the psyche are harmonized. Jung believed that true psychological growth comes from embracing and integrating these elements rather than suppressing or denying them. He argued that people often live fragmented lives, disconnected from their deeper, unconscious selves. Individuation is the process of becoming whole, acknowledging one's inner contradictions, facing hidden fears, and bringing unconscious material into conscious awareness. This process, Jung suggested, leads to a profound transformation, where individuals move beyond societal conditioning and discover their authentic selves. It is a journey inward toward a deeper, more integrated existence. Buddhism's path to liberation, seeing through the illusion of self, while Jung's individuation process emphasizes self-integration. Buddhist teachings approach personal transformation from a different angle. The Buddha, in his profound realizations, saw that suffering arises from attachment, especially attachment to a rigid sense of self. Buddhism teaches that the self is not a fixed, permanent entity, but a collection of changing experiences. The 5 aggregates, skandhas, form, sensation, perception, mental formations, and consciousness, come together to create the illusion of a solid self, but in reality, they are constantly in flux. Through deep meditation and self-inquiry, practitioners of Buddhism come to see that clinging to a fixed identity leads to suffering. The desire to define oneself, defend one's ego, and maintain a rigid self-concept creates a cycle of dissatisfaction. Enlightenment, nirvana, is reached not by strengthening the self, but by seeing through its illusion and embracing impermanence. Thus, while Jung's path leads to the formation of an integrated self, the Buddhist path guides individuals beyond the self altogether. Yet, paradoxically, both aim at the same ultimate goal, freedom from psychological suffering. Where the paths converge, the journey to wholeness and liberation at first, Jungian psychology and Buddhist philosophy might appear to be taking opposite routes, one constructing the self and the other deconstructing it. However, a closer look reveals a deeper synergy. Jung himself was fascinated by Eastern spirituality and recognized the striking parallels between his work and Buddhist teachings. He acknowledged that while individuation is essential, it is not an end in itself. A person who completes the individuation process may eventually come to the realization that the self they have constructed is, in fact, just another illusion. This insight aligns perfectly with the Buddhist understanding of non-self. The two-stage process, from integration to transcendence, the connection between Jungian psychology and Buddhist philosophy, suggests that human transformation occurs in 2 broad stages. Integration, the Jungian path. Before one can let go of the self, one must first understand and integrate its various aspects. Suppressed emotions, unconscious patterns, and hidden fears must be acknowledged and worked through. This process brings psychological healing, reducing internal conflicts and leading to a sense of wholeness. Transcendence, the Buddhist path. Once integration is achieved, one can begin to see through the illusion of self. Instead of being attached to an identity, one learns to flow with existence, embracing impermanence and interconnectedness. This leads to a deeper liberation, not by constructing a stronger self, but by releasing the need for a self altogether. In this way, Jung's psychology and Buddhist wisdom do not contradict each other. They form a continuum of personal evolution. The bridge across time connects these 2 perspectives, allowing individuals to embark on a journey of both self-realization and self-transcendence. Practical applications. Walking the bridge between Jung and Buddha, how can we apply this synthesis in our own lives? By integrating both Jungian psychology and Buddhist practice, we can develop a balanced approach to self-discovery and inner freedom, self-reflection and shadow work. Just as Jung advised integrating the unconscious, Buddhist mindfulness allows us to observe our inner workings without attachment. By confronting our fears, desires, and emotions with awareness, we gain clarity and inner peace. Embracing impermanence. While psychological work helps build a healthy self-concept, Buddhist wisdom teaches us not to cling to it. We learn to navigate life with fluidity, adapting to change rather than resisting it. Inner freedom beyond identity. The ultimate goal is not just to find ourselves, but to move beyond the need for a fixed identity. When we stop clinging to a rigid sense of self, we experience greater peace, flexibility, and freedom. Chapter 2: Jung's Quest for the Self. The path to individuation and wholeness. Throughout human history, individuals have sought to understand who they truly are. Questions of identity, purpose, and the nature of the self have driven countless philosophical, spiritual, and psychological inquiries. Among the greatest minds to explore this terrain was Carl Gustav Jung, a Swiss psychiatrist whose work fundamentally reshaped our understanding of the psyche. Jung's theories go beyond mere behavior and mental illness. They probe the depths of the unconscious and the archetypal structures that shape human experience. At the heart of his work lies the concept of individuation, a process by which a person integrates all aspects of their psyche to achieve a sense of wholeness. Unlike Sigmund Freud, who focused primarily on childhood experiences and repressed desires, Jung saw human development as a lifelong journey towards self-realization. But what does it mean to find the self? Is it a fixed entity waiting to be uncovered, or is it something fluid, continuously shaped by experience and unconscious forces? In this chapter, we delve into Jung's quest for the self, examining his key theories and their implications for personal transformation. 1. The psychological structure of the self. To understand Jung's vision of the self, we must first explore his model of the human psyche. Jung believed that the mind is not a singular entity, but a complex system composed of different layers and opposing forces. These elements must be reconciled for a person to achieve true psychological balance. The layers of the psyche. Jung divided the psyche into three primary components. The ego, the center of consciousness, representing one's personal identity, thoughts, and perceptions. It is the I that interacts with the world. The personal unconscious, a repository of forgotten memories, suppressed emotions, and unresolved conflicts. This layer is shaped by personal experiences. The collective unconscious, the deepest layer, containing inherited patterns of behavior and universal symbols known as archetypes. This realm connects all human beings through shared mythological and psychological structures. At the core of this system lies the self, which Jung described as the totality of the psyche, encompassing both the conscious and unconscious aspects of a person. Unlike the ego, which represents our day-to-day sense of identity, the self is the deeper, more holistic version of who we truly are. The process of realizing this true self is what Jung called individuation. 2. The individuation process. Becoming whole. Individuation is the lifelong journey of integrating all aspects of the psyche, both the seen and unseen, the accepted and the rejected. It is not about becoming someone new, but rather about becoming who we truly are by confronting and reconciling the hidden forces within us. The stages of individuation. Jung outlined several key steps in the individuation process. 1. Confronting the shadow. Facing the unconscious self. The first major challenge in individuation is the encounter with the shadow, which represents the darker, hidden side of the psyche. The shadow consists of repressed emotions, instincts, and socially unacceptable traits that we deny in ourselves but often project onto others. Jung emphasized that denying the shadow leads to inner conflict and psychological distress. To integrate it, one must acknowledge and accept these hidden aspects rather than repressing them. By bringing the shadow into conscious awareness, we reduce its destructive power and harness its energy for growth. 2. Integrating the anima and animus, balancing the inner masculine and feminine in Jungian psychology. Every individual possesses both masculine and feminine psychological energies. The anima in men, the unconscious feminine aspect associated with intuition, emotion, and receptivity. The animus in women, the unconscious masculine aspect linked to logic, strength, and assertiveness. To achieve psychological balance, one must integrate these opposing energies. A man who denies his anima may struggle with emotional expression, while a woman who rejects her animus might find it difficult to assert herself. By embracing both sides, a person becomes more complete. 3. Embracing the archetypes. Understanding the symbols of the psyche. Jung proposed that throughout history, human beings have been influenced by archetypes, universal patterns of behavior and symbols found in myths, religions, and dreams. Some key archetypes include the hero, the part of us that seeks purpose and overcomes challenges; the wise old man/wise woman, the inner source of wisdom and guidance; the trickster, the chaotic force that disrupts but also teaches; the self, the integrated, whole version of who we are meant to become. Understanding these archetypes helps individuals recognize recurring patterns in their lives and integrate them into their personal development. 4. Discovering the self, the final stage of individuation. After integrating the shadow, anima/animus, and archetypal forces, a person moves toward the realization of the self, the fully unified psyche. This does not mean the ego disappears, but rather that it becomes aligned with deeper, unconscious forces. At this stage, an individual experiences a profound sense of wholeness, authenticity, and inner peace. They are no longer ruled by unconscious fears or external expectations, but live in harmony with their true nature. 3. Jung and Eastern thought. The bridge to transcendence. Jung's work was deeply influenced by Eastern spirituality, particularly Buddhism and Hinduism. He saw striking similarities between the individuation process and spiritual enlightenment. Individuation and the Buddhist path. Just as Jung emphasized integrating the unconscious, Buddhism teaches mindfulness and self-inquiry to transcend egoic illusions. The self and the Atman. Jung's idea of the self parallels the Hindu concept of Atman, the higher self beyond the ego. Alchemy and transformation. Jung saw parallels between psychological growth and ancient alchemical traditions, which symbolized the purification of the soul. Jung believed that individuation was not merely a psychological process, but a spiritual journey leading to higher consciousness. 4. Practical steps. How to embark on the individuation process. How can we apply Jung's insights in everyday life? 1. Self-reflection and shadow work. Keep a journal to explore recurring emotions and behaviors. Pay attention to negative reactions. What we dislike in others often reflects our own unresolved issues. Practice radical self-honesty and accept both strengths and weaknesses. 2. Dream analysis and symbolism. Dreams reveal hidden messages from the unconscious. Writing them down and interpreting their symbols can provide insight into inner conflicts. Look for recurring symbols and patterns in personal experiences. 3. Meditation and mindfulness. Observe thoughts and emotions without judgment, allowing unconscious material to rise to awareness. Engage in contemplative practices such as yoga or nature walks to connect with the deeper self. 4. Creative expression. Artistic activities such as painting, writing, and music allow unconscious elements to surface. Explore mythology and literature to see how archetypal patterns manifest in stories. Chapter 3. Buddha's Path to No Self. The liberation beyond identity. For centuries, human beings have sought to understand the nature of the self. Is there a core essence within us that defines who we are? Or is the self merely an illusion, a construct created by the mind? While Western psychology, particularly Carl Jung's theory of individuation, emphasizes the integration and development of the self, Buddhism takes a radically different approach. The Buddha taught that what we call the self is not a permanent fixed entity, but an illusion, a fleeting combination of thoughts, sensations, and experiences with no true essence. This teaching, known as Anatta, Pali, or Anatman, Sanskrit, is one of the most profound and challenging insights in Buddhist philosophy. It suggests that freedom from suffering comes not through self-actualization, but through seeing through the illusion of self altogether. But how does this idea work in practice? How can one live without a fixed sense of self? And what does this mean for our personal growth and experience of the world? In this chapter, we will explore the Buddha's revolutionary insight into no-self, how it contrasts with Western concepts of identity, and how it can lead to profound inner freedom. 1. The illusion of self. What does no-self mean? The Buddha's teaching on Anatta is one of the core pillars of his philosophy, alongside anicca, impermanence, and dukkha, suffering. Together, these three insights form the foundation of Buddhist wisdom, known as the three marks of existence. The concept of no-self is often misunderstood. It does not mean that a person does not exist or that consciousness is an illusion. Rather, it means that there is no permanent, unchanging essence within us that can be called a self. To understand this, consider the following analogy. The river analogy. Is there a real river? Imagine standing by a river. The water is constantly flowing, never remaining the same from one moment to the next. If you return to the same spot a day later, the river appears unchanged, but the water within it is completely different. Similarly, our sense of self seems continuous, but it is actually composed of ever-changing thoughts, emotions, and experiences. The self we identify with today is different from the one we had 10 years ago. The idea of a permanent self is an illusion, like trying to hold on to a flowing river. The five aggregates, the components of experience. To further explain the illusion of self, the Buddha described human experience as being composed of five aggregates: skandhas, form, rupa, the physical body and sensory experiences; sensation, vedana, feelings of pleasure, pain, or neutrality; perception, sana, the ability to recognize and label experiences; mental formations, sankhara, thoughts, habits, and emotional reactions; consciousness, vaya, the awareness of experience. These five elements create the illusion of a cohesive self, but none of them remain constant. There is no owner behind them, just a dynamic process unfolding moment by moment. By seeing through this illusion, we free ourselves from attachment, fear, and suffering. 2. The root of suffering. Clinging to the self. Buddhism teaches that the root of suffering, dukkha, is attachment to a false sense of self. This attachment manifests in three main ways. 1. Attachment to identity. We cling to the idea of being a certain type of person, successful, intelligent, kind, strong. When our identity is threatened, we feel pain. A person who identifies as smart may suffer deeply when they fail an exam, not because of the failure itself, but because it contradicts their self-image. 2. Attachment to ownership. We tend to believe that thoughts, emotions, and experiences belong to us. We say, my pain, my sadness, my achievements, reinforcing the illusion of self. But if we observe closely, these experiences arise and pass away on their own. They do not belong to anyone. 3. Attachment to control. We believe we are in control of our minds and bodies, but in reality, thoughts appear on their own, emotions rise and fall without our permission, and the body ages regardless of our desires. Recognizing this lack of control leads to liberation from suffering. By understanding the illusion of self, we stop taking things personally. We no longer cling to success, failure, praise, or criticism. Instead, we move through life with ease, flexibility, and inner peace. 3. The path to liberation. Practicing no-self in everyday life. Understanding no-self intellectually is one thing, but experiencing it directly is another. Buddhist practice provides specific techniques to help dissolve the illusion of self and cultivate freedom. 1. Meditation. Observing the self in motion. Meditation allows us to watch thoughts, emotions, and sensations arise and disappear. Over time, we begin to see that these experiences do not belong to a permanent self. They are simply passing events. A common practice is vipassana meditation, where one observes sensations and thoughts without attachment. As awareness deepens, the sense of a fixed self begins to dissolve. 2. The who am I? Inquiry. In Zen Buddhism, a common practice is to ask, who am I? When a thought arises, ask, who is thinking this? When an emotion appears, ask, who is feeling this? This process gradually reveals that there is no solid I behind these experiences. 3. Letting go of ownership throughout the day, practice detaching from identity and ownership. Instead of saying, I am angry, say, there is anger. Instead of I am sad, say, sadness is present. This subtle shift reduces suffering by removing the sense of personal identification. 4. Embracing impermanence. Nothing stays the same. Thoughts, emotions, relationships, and even the body constantly change. By embracing impermanence, we stop clinging to things that are destined to fade, leading to greater peace and acceptance. 4. The ultimate freedom. Living without a fixed self. At first, the idea of no self may feel unsettling. Without a solid identity, what remains? Would life become meaningless? On the contrary, seeing through the illusion of self leads to profound freedom. Freedom from suffering. Without attachment to identity, external events no longer disturb inner peace. Freedom from fear. Fear of failure, rejection, and death arises from self-attachment. When the self is seen as an illusion, fear dissolves. Freedom to experience life fully. Instead of being trapped in rigid identity roles, one can flow with life, embracing each moment with openness. The great Zen master Shunryu Suzuki once said, "When you realize the self is empty, you are completely free to be whoever you want to be." Rather than negating life, the realization of no self enhances it. Without attachment to ego, life becomes a dynamic, ever-unfolding experience. Chapter 4. The Hidden Connection, Bridging Jung's Individuation and Buddha's No Self. In our exploration of Jung's quest for the self and Buddha's path to no self, we have seen two seemingly opposite approaches to understanding human consciousness. Jung, the Swiss psychologist, believed that true psychological wholeness comes from integrating the different aspects of the psyche, bringing the unconscious into awareness and forming a unified self. In contrast, the Buddha taught that the very idea of a self is an illusion, and that liberation comes from seeing through this illusion and detaching from identity altogether. At first glance, these two perspectives appear to be fundamentally opposed. One seeks to strengthen and integrate the self, while the other seeks to dissolve it. However, upon deeper examination, a hidden connection emerges, one that reveals how these two paths are not only compatible but complementary. In this chapter, we will uncover the bridge between Jungian psychology and Buddhist wisdom, showing how both perspectives ultimately lead toward the same destination: inner freedom and transformation. 1. Two paths, one destination. The paradox of self and no self. The key to understanding the connection between Jung's individuation and Buddha's no self lies in seeing them not as contradictions, but as two stages of the same journey. The journey of individuation, building the self before letting it go. Jung's process of individuation is about integrating unconscious aspects of the psyche, our shadow, archetypes, and repressed emotions, so that we become whole. He believed that many people live in a fragmented state, disconnected from their true nature because they repress parts of themselves. Individuation is the path to self-awareness, balance, and authenticity. However, individuation is not the final destination. Once a person has developed an integrated sense of self, they no longer need to cling to it. At this stage, the Buddhist insight of no self naturally arises. The journey to no self, letting go of the illusion. Buddhism teaches that the self is a mental construct, a collection of experiences, thoughts, and sensations that constantly change. If a person tries to dissolve the self before achieving inner balance, they may experience confusion, dissociation, or even psychological distress. This is why attempting to practice no self too early, before integrating unconscious material, can be destabilizing. Instead, once a person has fully individuated, they may naturally begin to see that the self is not a fixed entity, but a fluid, ever-changing process. At this point, letting go of the self is no longer threatening. It becomes a path to true liberation. Thus, Jungian individuation and Buddhist no-self are not separate paths, but stages of the same transformation. One builds the foundation, the other releases attachment to it. 2. The psychological and spiritual growth cycle, understanding this hidden connection, allows us to see personal development and spiritual awakening as part of a larger growth cycle. Stage 1. Ego development. The formation of identity in early life. Individuals develop a sense of self through ego formation. They identify with cultural roles, personal narratives, and social conditioning. At this stage, the ego is fragile and defensive, seeking validation and fearing its dissolution. Stage 2. Individuation. Integrating the unconscious. Jung's process of individuation begins when a person starts questioning societal conditioning and seeks to integrate their unconscious aspects. This involves confronting the shadow self, repressed emotions, fears, and desires, integrating the anima/animus, inner masculine and feminine aspects, recognizing and understanding archetypal patterns in personal and collective experience. Through this process, the individual becomes more authentic, self-aware, and psychologically whole. They no longer live according to external expectations, but operate from their true nature. Stage 3. The realization of no self. Letting go of identity. Once a person fully individuates, they may begin to realize that their sense of self, while useful for navigating the world, is ultimately an illusion. At this stage, Buddhist teachings on impermanence, non-attachment, and emptiness become deeply relevant. The attachment to identity dissolves, but wholeness remains. The individual moves beyond psychological healing into spiritual liberation. Life is experienced with openness, fluidity, and a lack of egoic resistance. Stage 4. Integration. Living with both self and no self. The final stage is not about choosing between self and no self, but about living with both. A person who reaches this stage can function in society with a healthy, individuated self, operate from a deep awareness that the self is not fixed or separate, navigate life with presence, authenticity, and detachment. This is true freedom, not being trapped in egoic illusions, but also not rejecting the self entirely. It is the middle way, where both psychological wholeness and spiritual transcendence coexist. 3. The bridge between Jung and Buddha. Practical applications. Now that we understand how individuation and no-self connect, how can we apply this knowledge in real life? 1. Self-reflection and shadow work. Jungian approach. Before letting go of the self, one must integrate its fragmented aspects. Journaling. Write about fears, suppressed emotions, and recurring dreams. Dream analysis. Pay attention to dreams as messages from the unconscious. Therapy or inner dialogue. Explore unresolved conflicts to achieve inner balance. 2. Meditation and self-inquiry. Buddhist approach. Once individuation is underway, one can begin loosening attachment to the self. Vipassana meditation. Observe thoughts and emotions without identifying with them. Self-inquiry. Who am I? Ask, who is aware of these experiences? Impermanence practice. Contemplate how all things, including identity, are ever-changing. 3. Balancing action and detachment. Engage fully with life, but do not attach to outcomes. Pursue goals, but do not define yourself by success or failure. Express individuality, but recognize that it is a temporary role, not an ultimate truth. By combining these approaches, one can live with both depth and lightness, aware of the self's importance while also understanding its illusory nature. Chapter 5. Freedom in Practice. Integrating Jung's individuation and Buddha's no-self in everyday life. In the previous chapters, we explored two profound paths: Jung's individuation, the journey towards self-integration, and Buddha's no-self, the realization that the self is an illusion. We also uncovered the hidden connection between these approaches, recognizing that they are not contradictions but complementary aspects of the same transformative process. Now comes the most important question: how do we apply these insights in daily life? True wisdom is not just intellectual understanding, it is lived experience. A concept, no matter how profound, holds little value unless it can be embodied in the way we think, act, and relate to the world. This chapter will focus on practical applications of both Jungian psychology and Buddhist philosophy, showing how we can navigate life with authenticity, balance, and inner freedom. 1. The paradox of freedom. Living with and beyond the self, many people believe that personal freedom comes from strengthening their sense of self through achievements, confidence, or self-expression. Others believe that freedom comes from dissolving the self, detaching from identity and desires. But the truth is more nuanced. Real freedom comes from embracing both perspectives simultaneously. Jungian freedom, the freedom to be fully oneself, integrating all parts of the psyche. Buddhist freedom, the freedom from oneself, seeing through the illusion of identity. A person who is too attached to their ego suffers from rigidity, self-importance, and fear of loss. But a person who tries to erase the self prematurely may experience dissociation, lack of direction, or emotional suppression. True freedom lies in the balance, living with a strong, integrated self while not being trapped by it, engaging fully in life while recognizing its impermanence, expressing individuality while knowing that identity is ultimately fluid. This is the middle way, a path that allows us to move between self-affirmation and self-transcendence with grace and wisdom. 2. The practical path. How to apply these insights in daily life. How can we live with both self-integration and self-transcendence? Here are 5 key practices that bridge Jungian psychology and Buddhist wisdom. 1. Self-reflection and shadow work. Integrating the self. Before one can move beyond the self, one must understand and integrate it. Jung emphasized the importance of confronting the shadow, the unconscious parts of ourselves that we deny or repress. How to practice. Journaling. Write about emotional triggers, fears, and patterns in your life. What do they reveal about your unconscious self? Dream analysis. Keep a dream journal. Jung believed dreams reveal hidden parts of the psyche that need integration. Radical self-honesty. Acknowledge difficult truths about yourself without judgment. What parts of yourself do you project onto others? The goal is to become more whole by accepting every aspect of oneself, including both strengths and weaknesses. 2. Mindfulness and meditation. Seeing through the illusion of self. Once a person has developed a strong, integrated self, they can begin the deeper practice of letting go of self-attachment. Buddhist meditation helps one observe thoughts and emotions without identifying with them. How to practice. Vipassana meditation. Sit in silence and observe sensations, thoughts, and emotions as they arise and pass. Notice that none of them are you. They are temporary experiences. Self-inquiry. Who am I? Ask yourself repeatedly, who is aware of these thoughts? The deeper you go, the more you realize that there is no fixed self behind experience. Embracing impermanence. Reflect daily on how everything changes: thoughts, emotions, relationships, and even identity. This reduces attachment and fear. 3. The art of detachment. Holding identity loosely. Freedom does not mean abandoning life's responsibilities. It means engaging fully without attachment. This is what Zen calls playing in the world but not being of it. How to practice. Detach from praise and criticism. Whether people praise or criticize you, remind yourself, these are just passing opinions, not absolute truths. Detach from success and failure. Whether you win or lose, succeed or fail, realize that none of it defines your true nature. Keep doing your best, without being bound by the outcome. Detach from fixed roles. Allow yourself to change. You do not have to be the smart one, the kind one, or the strong one. Identity is fluid. Adapt with it. When we hold identity loosely, we can express ourselves freely without fear of loss. 4. Living authentically. The merging of individuation and no self. How does one live practically with both a sense of self and the understanding that the self is an illusion? The answer is to engage with life fully, but without clinging. How to practice. Follow your passions, but without ego. Do what brings you joy, but do not let it define your worth. Speak your truth, but hold it lightly. Express yourself with honesty, but remain open to changing perspectives. Love deeply, but without possession. Cherish relationships, but do not grasp onto people as if they are permanent. This balance allows us to fully experience life without being enslaved by it. 5. Service and compassion. Moving beyond the self, both Jungian psychology and Buddhism emphasize that true fulfillment comes not from self-centered pursuits, but from serving others. How to practice? Practice generosity. Give freely, whether it is time, knowledge, or kindness, without expecting anything in return. Cultivate compassion. Recognize that everyone is struggling with their own fears and illusions. Respond with understanding rather than judgment. Shift from "what can I gain" to "how can I serve?" Instead of chasing personal validation, seek ways to contribute to the greater whole. When we focus less on ourselves and more on the well-being of others, we naturally experience greater peace and fulfillment. 3. The ultimate freedom. Living with depth and lightness. What does life look like when we integrate Jung's self and Buddha's no-self? Imagine a person who knows who they are, yet does not cling to their identity, engages with life fully, yet remains detached from outcomes, experiences emotions deeply, yet is not controlled by them, acts with purpose, yet is free from ego-driven desires. Such a person moves through the world with both depth and lightness, grounded in authenticity, yet open to change. They are neither lost in ego nor trying to escape it. Instead, they flow with existence, embracing both the personal and the infinite. This is true freedom, the ability to live with the self while knowing that it is not ultimately real. The universal truth, beyond self and no self, finding ultimate freedom. Through the previous chapters, we have explored two profound paths, Jung's quest for the self and Buddha's path to no self, and discovered how they are not contradictory but complementary. We have seen how individuation leads to psychological wholeness, and how seeing through the illusion of self brings spiritual liberation. We have also learned practical ways to integrate these insights into our daily lives, allowing us to experience both depth and lightness, engagement and detachment. Now we arrive at the ultimate question: is there a deeper truth that unites all these perspectives? Beneath the layers of psychology, philosophy, and spirituality, there is something universal, a truth that is not confined to any single tradition but is recognized across cultures, religions, and schools of thought. It is the truth that goes beyond words, beyond concepts, beyond the distinction between self and no self. This chapter will explore this universal truth, revealing how all wisdom traditions ultimately point to the same realization, that we are already free, already whole, already at peace, if only we can see it. 1. The ultimate paradox. We are both everything and nothing. At the heart of the human search for meaning lies an apparent paradox. On one hand, we seek self-knowledge, personal growth, and fulfillment, believing that there is a deeper, truer self to be realized. On the other hand, spiritual traditions teach that the self is an illusion, and that ultimate peace comes from letting go of identity altogether. So which is true? The answer is both and neither. The illusion of separation. From the moment we are born, we are conditioned to believe in separateness. We see ourselves as distinct individuals, our bodies, our names, our personalities defining who we are. We view others as external beings, and we perceive life as a series of experiences happening to us. But if we look deeper, we see that this sense of separateness is an illusion. Our bodies are made of the same elements as the earth. Our thoughts arise and dissolve like waves in an ocean, with no fixed boundary between my mind and the world. Our identities are constantly changing, shaped by culture, memory, and circumstance. What we call self is not separate from the universe, it is an expression of it. The self is real, but not as we think. Instead of asking, does the self exist or not? A more useful question is, what is the self made of? If we look closely, we see that the self is a temporary pattern of consciousness, a constantly shifting flow of thoughts, sensations, and awareness. Jung was right that we must integrate this pattern to live fully. The Buddha was right that this pattern has no permanent essence. The universal truth is that we are both everything and nothing. We are a unique expression of life, yet not separate from it. An individual wave, yet also the vast ocean. This realization is not something to be intellectually understood. It must be directly experienced. 2. The same realization across different traditions throughout history, different spiritual and philosophical traditions have pointed to this same universal truth. The words may be different, but the essence remains the same. Buddhism, emptiness and interbeing, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. The Heart Sutra, the Buddha taught that all things are empty of inherent existence, but are also interconnected. This means that while there is no fixed self, life is still full of meaning and expression. Hinduism, the self is the universe tat tvam asi, thou art that. The Upanishads, Hindu philosophy, teaches that our individual self, Atman, is ultimately the same as the universal self, Brahman. When we transcend ego, we realize that we are the whole cosmos. Christian mysticism, losing yourself to find yourself. Whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. Jesus, Matthew 10 verse 39. Christian mystics speak of dying to the self, letting go of ego to realize a greater unity with God. Sufism, the drop merging with the ocean. You are not a drop in the ocean. You are the entire ocean in a drop. Rumi Sufi mystics describe spiritual awakening as merging with the divine, realizing that the self is both nothing and everything. Taoism, flowing with the way, the Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. Laozi Taoism teaches that true wisdom comes from surrendering to the natural flow of existence, rather than clinging to identity or control. Though these traditions come from different cultures, their core insight is the same. Beyond the illusion of separateness, there is only wholeness. 3. How to live this truth, embodying freedom, the realization of self and no self, unity and emptiness, individuality and oneness is profound. But how do we live it? 1. Stop searching. Start seeing. Many people spend their lives searching for enlightenment, happiness, or fulfillment as if it is something to be attained. But the truth is already here, always present. The key is not to chase something outside ourselves, but to recognize what has always been. 2. Shift from control to trust. The ego seeks control. It wants certainty, security, and permanence. Freedom comes from trusting the flow of life, knowing that we are not separate from it. When we stop grasping, life unfolds effortlessly. 3. Act without attachment. Engage with life fully, but do not cling to success or failure. Love deeply, but do not possess. Create, but do not identify with your creations. This is what Zen calls acting without an actor. For be both empty and full. Know that you are nothing, a passing moment in the vastness of existence. Know that you are everything, the universe expressing itself as you. When we hold both truths at once, we experience true freedom. 4. The final realization. You are always free. The journey we have taken, from self-discovery to self-transcendence, from individuation to no self, was never about becoming something new. It was always about realizing what was already true. You do not need to find yourself. You are never lost. You do not need to become enlightened. You already are, if you stop resisting. You do not need to escape the self. You only need to see through its illusion. The final realization is that there was never anything to seek, because you were already home. So what now? Live, fully, freely, and without fear. Be whoever you are in this moment, knowing that you are both a temporary wave and the infinite ocean. This is the universal truth, the same truth Jung, Buddha, and countless others discovered. You are already whole. You are already free, and you always have been.